And well, welcome everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy middle of October. We hope that you and your teams and your kids are all safe and doing well in this really uncertain and busy year. We are excited to talk to you all today, regardless of where you're coming into this conversation about Modern Classrooms Project, because what we've heard repeatedly from schools and districts is this is really exciting. We want to try this. We're really overwhelmed this year. And so, Emily and I, in talking, said, well, we need to help people think about, like, where do you start? You don't need to start with everything all at once. You can dip your toe into the water rather than taking the polar plunge, I like to say. So that's our goal today, is to be able to think like that. So first, just who we are. My name is Christine Barford. I am the Director of School and District Partnerships. I'm a former middle school teacher and principal and then leadership coach. And I've been with the Modern Classrooms Project since the start of the year.
And I'm Emily Dia. I'm a partnerships manager here. I was a teacher for 20 years. I found the model 18 years in, and it really just revolutionized my practice, gave me new energy, new life. Most importantly, helped me meet my kids in new ways that I'd never done before. And I've been here since June. I'm glad to be here with y'all. Oh, I also supported teachers as an instructional coach doing the model. I should say that. It might be helpful.
Great. Well, we only have a half hour. We are going to share with you a little bit of research that we have collected and others have collected about what's kind of going on at the moment. Then we're going to talk about our model and where you can begin if you're thinking about biting this off as an initiative or some piece of this. And then we're going to have time for your questions. So just to get right into it, we'll talk for a second about what the research says. So I think anecdotally, we all know that things are never going to be exactly the same as they were pre-pandemic. We were recently featured in a study by the Christensen Institute, who collected some information on schools' use of instructional resources pre-pandemic, during the pandemic. I guess we're still in the pandemic, right? During quarantines, I should say, and now what they are considering folks' impressions to be at use post-pandemic. You can see here, the blue bar is how people responded to how they use things like online assignments, live video instruction, administering quizzes or checks for understanding pre-pandemic, how they're using it currently, and what their plan to use it is after this is behind us. Some things that stood out here are just it's not just us. Things are going to change. Use of video is here to stay. Folks are starting to realize the importance of collecting information on student understanding and mastery at regular intervals because students are not all prepared to move on at the same time. It's very visible now that we have these rolling absences and quarantines. And so our changes are here and they're with us to stay, which means that some of our instructional practices need to change as well. We can't we can't go back to doing business the way it was done before because the time is no longer the same. We've had research studies done with our partners at Johns Hopkins University for the last couple of years. Our first one was in 2019, 2020, where we surveyed about 2,000 students and 55 teachers, a group of whom had been through our training, and then a comparison group of teachers. And here's what some of the information showed pre-pandemic. We saw things when folks had gone through our training and then shifted their instructional model, huge changes between how they felt like they could help students who have missed class catch up, how they could work closely with each of their students during class. You can see comparison, teachers to those who had gone through our training were implementing the model. We then, though, thought that's pre-pandemic. Things have forever changed, as we just saw in the last slide, right? How did folks respond during the pandemic? And this is what was really interesting to us. What we saw generally is that all teachers' skills developed during the pandemic. Folks had to start using video. And therefore, we saw really higher rates from comparison teachers around being able to teach students effectively in a remote environment. That's great. We saw big differences, though, in whether comparison teachers and folks who had gone through our training were implementing our model, whether they could easily transition between in-person and remote learning. We know that that's something a lot of schools are dealing with right now and may continue to. And then whether they could support students in learning independently at home. Again, this number, 82% for our comparison teachers, was likely much lower pre-pandemic. Folks' skills have gone up. We do see a bump after they've gone through our training. The one last piece of data I'm just going to show before we jump into our model and then where you can start is how some of our teachers responded to the start of year and middle of year during the pandemic, how did they feel they were able to support their students in some of the things that are most challenging for teachers right now, whether or not they could know what each student had mastered. We can see at the start of the year, folks who have gone through our training felt like 68% of them felt like they could. After our training, by the end of the year, 96% felt that they could. So we've seen some big changes by implementing our instructional model. We want more teachers to be able to do that. We have a free online course, we have a training to do it, but again, this is such a busy year. Where do you begin? We know ultimately that when we shift instructional models, it's good for teachers, it's good for kids. We saw some long-term impacts of this in our Johns Hopkins study. 72% of our long-term practitioners felt like they were more likely to continue teaching as a career. 94% felt like they will continue to adopt modern classroom practices for the rest of their career. And then just a quote from Kareem Farah, our founder, or our co-founder, around traditional models of teaching. They aren't built to support students who frequently miss class. I will just note, because it's not in here, they're also not built to support teachers when they have to roll off in quarantine throughout the year, which we know is a reality for many of us. All right, so that's where we come into this conversation. So how can our model help? We have a couple of tweets that we're just going to share from folks. We know that folks have experienced shortages, staffing shortages, the need to go home and quarantine and test for 2 days before returning to class. We believe that a model that does not rely in synchronous instruction allows for teachers and schools to better be able to respond to student needs right now. You can see it in Rhiannon's quote right here. Dr. Rebecca Greenfield shared that her sub said that her class runs itself, greatest compliment that you could receive. And Marissa Bongo's quote here around unexpected remote day-to-day business is business as usual for her kids. So this is our instructional model. I saw in the chat that some of you are familiar with it. Maybe you consider yourself a newbie. Maybe you've been working through our free course. There's 3 main tenets in our model. The first is blended instruction. The next is a self-paced structure. And then all of that leads to mastery-based grading. For those of us who have been in education for a while, we know that we've all been trying to get to mastery-based grading for years. It's really difficult to do if you don't have those first 2 pieces in place. So just to really quickly break down each of those components, when we talk about blending instruction, we're talking about eliminating whole class lectures, not labs, seminars, all of the collaborative activities that are really important to students. But teachers are developing their own instructional videos and resources. So we're not just grabbing external videos from other resources. We encourage teachers to become their own video content creators, because we know that instructional videos that are creative and personal are what engage students the most and ultimately help them learn. We have teachers using this K through adult learners. This is an example of a kindergarten instructional video. And we ultimately want teachers to feel like they can clone themselves. Like, instead of me talking to 25 students at once, I'm having individual conversations with all of my students through video or in person by pulling small groups. The next component, once we blend instruction, is to allow students to self-pace. In our classroom, students are self-paced within 1 unit of study. We call it self-pacing with guardrails. And we do that through a lesson classification process. We classify lessons as must do, should do, and aspire to do. What you term them is up to you. What's important is the planning process that goes into that. Do you know what the core content or major standards of your grade level and content area are? Those are the ones that must not be missed by students in order to demonstrate mastery of the unit. Do I know what some of the supporting standards or further application are? That's where we can start to differentiate for students. If you have a 2-week quarantine and aren't able to access videos or instruction, maybe you don't do the aspire to do's. Or if you've been present and are really itching to move forward, you're going to do all 3 of those types of lessons. Teachers use that planning process to create what you see here, examples of public and private pacing trackers, where students know where they are during the unit and teachers can monitor where students are. And then the last piece is mastery-based grading, kind of that holy grail that we've all been trying to get to for so long. When we talk about mastery-based grading, we're talking about mastery checks. Do I know where every student is and what they have mastered at the end of the lesson? This is not a new idea. It's been around for a long time, but we're helping teachers develop not only their mastery checks, but also their criteria for revision, reassessment, and reflection. We know that ultimately not every student will get it the first time. That's okay, but it's not okay if you don't have a plan for how students can demonstrate mastery after practice and take it again. So all of that's great. You're probably here because you know a bit about the model, but where do you start now in a year that is full of challenges? I think Emily and I would both just like to say to everyone on here, you do not need to do everything at once. If you think that you do, it will be really difficult to take the first step. We just wanted to break down each component and give some suggestions for how might you start to take a few steps in this direction if this is an initiative that you think is important to your personal practice or to your school or district. So one strategy is supporting the creation of instructional videos. We looked at that Christensen Institute article to start. They're not going away. We know that many of you probably have seen the power of delivering live instruction over video as opposed to, I should have said that differently, delivering instruction over video as opposed to live. So you can think about maybe just starting with instructional videos. We can't assume that everyone knows how to do instructional videos well just because we have had to do them in the last year, right? We only learn so much through osmosis. And so if you think about training in instructional videos, a few things and tips that you'll see in our course and in our training are that effective instructional videos are highly focused. So they're focused just on one objective. They're brief. They're about 6 to 9 minutes. They have clear visuals with limited text. There's energy and enthusiasm in the folks' voices as they're presenting. And when I say folks, that's your teachers. And they're enhanced. So we embed checks for understanding, questions. We have students take notes. And they're personal. When you can speak to your direct content, to your situation, to your school, students are more likely to pay attention. They're more likely to be engaged, and they're more likely to maintain that relationship with you as their teacher. So you can do that through a few ways. If you're interested in starting with instructional videos, we'd say as a first step, start by learning more about them. We will send out this deck to everyone who's here, so you'll have this. We've linked in a couple of things here, some podcast episodes, also the link to this module in our free course, and an Edutopia article that our co-founder Kareem Farah had written about making your own instructional videos. We would encourage you as a first step, maybe just this month, you read or listen to one of those. And then next month you bite off another. You do not need to be creating all instructional videos right now. This is about taking first steps. There's also, if you're in a position to create time for your staff, if you're in a school leadership position, we would recommend dedicating time for your staff, if this is something you're interested in, to work on their videos. They do take time at first. They get easier, they get quicker the more you do it, but at first you really need to dedicate a little time to making them right. And to reflect on or in your community. And so together you might read one of these articles, you might do the module, maybe not the whole free course, maybe this module together and reflect as a community, and you build that into your school time. Another strategy would be ensure that leaders and teachers have agreement on critical content. We know that kids are missing school, teachers are missing school this year. We can't change that, even if our instructional model is great and keeps learning continuous. And so we need to think about what do we know what critical content is for this year? And do we have a plan for what stays and what gets cut? Otherwise, we know that teachers may just continue to teach and you may run out of time. That's a reality for all of us every year. And so what we would suggest is to ask yourself some essential questions as a team. What content would stay? What content might needs to get cut? And what content is most essential? This is the start of that planning for those must-do, should-dos, and aspire-to-dos that are part of our model. And you might do that at a large level, by unit or by scope and sequence. And you can see here an example of a learning matrix where we've got different lessons on scientific notation, significant digits, and dimensional analysis. This is an example where a teacher went through and actually identified which of these lessons and standards are the most important. So how do you do that? Well, you might start again by learning. We've linked a few things here: how to create a self-paced classroom, checking out a blog post, or listening to one of our Modern Classroom podcast episodes. Maybe you do that on your way to school this week. Setting small goals for this month could be a good way to start to learn in this direction. And again, if you're in a position to create additional time for your staff, you might ensure teacher and leadership agreement on critical content by creating some meeting times to talk about exactly this. Maybe you listen to the podcast together and then start to have this conversation. You might start to update scope and sequences or support teachers in backwards planning and lesson classification. And then our third strategy is to support mastery-based grading. So we understand mastery-based grading as an instructional approach where students exhibit a certain threshold of competency or proficiency with an objective before they move on. So I don't move on because tomorrow's Wednesday. I move on because I have mastered this content and I'm now ready for the next. And we think about research-based best practices in mastery-based grading by dividing learning into small chunks, providing adequate opportunities for practice, assessing frequently, and adjusting instruction. So where do we start? Mastery-based grading, like I've said a couple of times, has been looming out there. So many of us have been interested in this for such a long time. Where do you start? Again, we'd start by learning. We've linked a few things in here. Again, podcasts, some articles. We have a webinar on launching modern mastery-based grading in our classrooms. And there's a module in our free course on this. If you're in a position to dedicate time, we would think about creating revision and reassessment policies and reflect on examples. I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides, we are not prescriptive in how you think about grading and how you think about those policies. Our mentors do it in a wide variety of ways. And it could be a good idea for you as we look at these next two slides to think about which of those resonate with me, with my beliefs, my instructional practices and approach. And that's a great conversation for teams to have. Here's a couple. Monty allows students to reattempt any assignment they want for as many times as they want. So they have unlimited retake opportunities until the end of the unit. For mastery checks, she allows students 2 tries. Nora, students have unlimited tries to revise and reassess. We've got Tavia, where if students don't achieve mastery on a one-on-one, they have a one-on-one conference with Tavia to discuss concepts that were missed. And Cheyenne, if students need to revise a mastery check, she works in small groups and one-on-one sessions. None of these are the right or wrong way to go about mastery-based grading, revision, reassessment, and reflection in your classroom, but they do provide a helpful starting point to having conversations within your team. Again, you don't need to bite all of this off at once, but maybe you start just by looking at these with your team and saying, where might we start? So let me pause there because that was about 20 minutes of me talking. We would love to take some time to answer any questions that you all have. And you can drop those directly into the chat to hosts and panelists, or you can directly direct them right to panelists. And Emily, let me know if we've missed any, if we should answer them as we get kicking off.
Somebody asked earlier if we were going to send the recording out, which we will. So no worries there.
We'll also share this deck that has all of those resources that we just talked about linked right in here so that you can easily pull up a podcast or a webinar.
Mm-hmm. Any questions bubbling up? Sometimes, Christine, leaders ask me like, where's the easiest entry point, or where's like a tenable entry point for teachers? And I would say just those things that are really tangible. I think creating a whole mastery-based grading system and philosophy is really challenging. But creating a pacing tracker feels like something I could do, and put on my board and feel like I did something, So I think something that you can see, or a video is the same way, that you can create and have as an artifact is a helpful entry point. All right, we've got a question. Do people usually start with a script when recording instructional videos? Again, I think the question is really varies on the person. I was like a notorious, like write it out in every presenter notes on my slides at first. And then by the end, of the year, when I had implemented 5 or 6 units, I was just sort of doing it on the fly. So for me, it was a progression over time. I found that I had to at least plan out my teaching points for each slide, like just bullet points. That really helped me to make sure I didn't miss any essential content. But I think every teacher has a different practice there.
I would also say we just don't believe that there is a perfect instructional video. Yeah. So we encourage folks to not necessarily use dates so that you can make sure that you can reuse them, and don't sweat it being perfect. It's not worth doing 30 tries of your instructional video. It's a part of student learning. You're also going to be there to talk with them in small groups and individually.
And then a question from Sheila about mastery checks with reading. Yep, I was a language arts teacher. This can be kind of tricky to get your head around. But I think it's some really fun creativity here too. So sometimes I would have, I would use flip grids for mastery checks and have kids like narrate some kind of comprehension, or they're thinking about a passage through a flip grid. And then sometimes I would just do it really skill-based. Read this passage, I'm going to assess your thematic claim, and I would include a rubric there, a 1, 2, 3, 4 rubric, and give them feedback in that way. I've also done like kind of group mastery checks if it was a book club unit where the group that had to submit something as an artifact of the skill that the lesson was about as a club, and then go that way. So there's lots of and you can hit me up on the side. I have tons of ideas there, but it can be done. It can definitely be done. Let's see.
Milan asked, how long before you felt like you saw the process was really working? That's a great question.
That is a really good question. For me, it was honestly like week 2. It was like almost immediate in terms of the impact. And I think it's because I had the benefit of working with a mentor through our virtual mentorship program and like learning how to design the course and all the structures really, really well, so that my kids were really clear on how it was going to run. And they and the process was really clear from the very beginning. I got incredible formative data like I had never gotten before in my whole career. And I really did use that data to differentiate the instruction for the next day. I could pull groups, I could see where people are, you know, within the unit. It was really transformative. So for me, it was pretty immediate. For me, yeah, pretty amazing.
I think we would say it's probably different for everyone though. And
Totally.
you know, when we talk about starting small, if you start small, it may take a little time to see the impact, and that's okay. It's better to start small and keep making moves in that direction than feel like you need to bite it off all at once and then put it off for that reason. So we'd encourage you to start anywhere and just be patient with yourself as you learn things.
Yeah, I talked to a teacher earlier today. He was just using playlists for now. The instructional video piece felt too overwhelming. So she was using playlists, and then she did have a tracker that was a public tracker that her kids were moving themselves along that playlist as they finished tasks. So that's a great example of a good place to start.
Yep.
Modified place to start. Well, what advice or strategies do you suggest for teachers who want to support the development of soft skills needed for students? What can teachers do to develop self-starting, independence, et cetera? Yeah, this is a great question. A lot of our teachers do a unit 0 about soft skills where they're teaching their students how to do this cycle of watching a video, doing some practice, completing a mastery check, but in the context of soft skills. So maybe each mini lesson is about things like self-starting, or maybe it is about like, what is executive functioning, and what is, as a 12-year-old brain, what's your brain doing right now, and what's it capable of in terms of organization? Some of these things are really helpful. The other thing I've seen teachers do is to have like a starter before their work time in their classes. So they would do like a pro tip, an SEL tip, to say like, today we're going to be, you know, going into our unit work, but I want to teach you a little bit about making a checklist as a way that you can keep yourself on track today, or just like a little pro tip around efficiencies in that way. But there's, again, tons of ways to do it, but I do think they need to be taught explicitly. It's really helpful for kids.
These are great questions.
Yeah.
If there are any last ones, we can certainly have time to answer probably 1 or 2 more if you have them. No, Emily and I don't mind wait time.
Oh, we got a hand raised. I don't know if I can call on you. I don't think you can talk since it's a webinar, but could you type it, Taylor? See if I could answer it.
Yes. All right, let me scoot back. Provision, reassessment, and reflection, I think, is what you're asking about, Milan. So this will be in the deck that we send to all of you as follow-up. Great. Well, as we close, I think we want to thank you again for being here with us, and excuse my screen as I zip back through towards our questions slide. We would just love to close by saying we will share this deck with you. And then we'd love to just ask you a little poll, like what next steps are you thinking about taking as you think about using MCP? So a poll should pop up and would love to get your thoughts.
This is great. Thank you.
Great. Well, we are collecting this. You will hear from us in follow-up. And also just know that you can start anywhere and that we'd love to support you. This is a journey for everyone. We are here to make sure that more students and more teachers have access to our model and to sustainable ways for teaching that ultimately better impact students and teachers. And here are our email addresses. If you'd like to jot them down, they will be in the deck as well. Please feel free to reach out to either of us if you have questions. And with that, we'd just love to say have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, your day, and the rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but we'll stay on if you have any questions.